Hope you're ready to think and ponder because this is quite an intricate series that I'm about to go over. So, the series I'm about to go over with is written by Dan Brown, and every single one of these books is centered around a character named Robert Langdon, who is a symbologist and professor at Harvard University. And if you are into murder mystery mixed with puzzle solving and history and visiting several locations across the globe, then this is definitely the series for you. And I will go ahead and say that certain books are stronger than others, but heck, they were good enough to have a few movie adaptations and even a show adaptation, if I remember correctly. But we'll just go ahead and jump right into it. So the first one here is going to be called Angels and Demons. And this one was adapted into a movie out of chronological order in the movie series. I'm going to try my best to go in chronological order in this review here. But this is the first book in Robert Langdon's story. And basically, a particle known as antimatter was stolen from a research facility, CERN, I believe it was what it was called, which has the super collider. And some bad people have it, and they need Robert Langdon to come in over to Italy and help solve the mystery that these bad people have kind of left clues and stuff for people to find and figure out, like where the location of the antimatter is. And so basically, through these clues that he's given and his knowledge that he already has, Robert Langdon has to follow something called the Path of Illumination, which was back in the day a bit of a rite of passage initiation thing for a old organization known as the Illuminati. And you'll find all kinds of neat designs in this book that are ambigrams. And basically, what that is, it's an image or a word that reads the same if it's forwards or backwards. You can flip it around and it would still read the same thing. And basically, the ambigrams you encounter in this are based off of the four elements, earth, air, fire, and water. But it's really a quite interesting read. It's definitely, in my personal opinion, probably the weakest book and the most difficult to get through out of all the ones I'm going to go through in this review. But I still enjoyed it enough to continue on. And there's also a character you encounter in this book who's kind of like the main adversary that's pulling the strings, if you will. And he is described as an albino character, but what's interesting is that he's in this book, which has a film adaptation, but the next book I'm going to go over, which also has a film adaptation, they put the albino character in the movie of the next book that I'm going into, which I thought was a interesting change, if you ask me. But without further ado, we're going to go into my favorite book in this series, and this was actually the first one in this series that was adapted into a film. It was weird. They did this one, then they did Angels and Demons, and I'm not quite sure why they did that. Maybe they knew that this was a stronger story and decided to start with that one in order to have the money to make the rest of them. I'm not totally sure. But another detail I kept out in Angels and Demons, this book and the next book I do after this one, Robert Langdon is portrayed in the film by Tom Hanks, and he does a phenomenal job as this character. Like, really sold the role. About as good as Nicolas Cage in National Treasure. It's tough to beat that one. But this book is the DaVinci Code. And this is probably the one book out of this whole series that just about everybody has heard of. It's definitely the most popular and the most well written, in my personal opinion. Even as a middle school, high school aged individual, when I actually read this book, like, I literally couldn't put the book down. Like, it was so fascinating to me. So we got another murder mystery on our hands, and Robert Langdon is thrown right into the mix yet again. But there's a twist. He is actually a murder suspect. So there's a bit of a race against time and trying to stay ahead of the authorities while also trying to solve the actual murder mystery through all kinds of codes and clues that the murder victim has left behind. And one thing I forgot to mention in Angels and Demons is that Robert Langdon has a female companion that's going through the adventure all the whole time that he is. In Angels and Demons, it's a girl by the name of Victoria, I believe, who is related to the murder victim of the first book. And she's basically kind of the spearheaded point trying to find the antimatter in Angels and Demons. And they kind of develop a bit of a romantic connection, and that's kind of where that book leaves off. And then you hop into this book, and he hasn't seen Vittoria for a while. And now you've got another female companion going through the adventure with him who's also related to the murder victim in some way, shape, or fashion in this book. And her name is Sophia, I believe. No, it was Sophie. That's what it was. And so they're going through this adventure together, and it eventually leads them to an object that is pretty much going to set the tone for the rest of the film. And I actually got one of them right here. It's a big part of the book and the movie, and it's an item known as a cryptex. And basically, what it is in the movie, it was a five-dial device that you can turn, and each of these dials has the entire alphabet on them. So you have to figure out what word unlocks the object. But there's a twist. You can't just simply try and force it open, because there's a mechanism that has a glass vial of vinegar, I believe it was, inside of this. So if you try to force it open, it'll crack up in the vial and dissolve the papyrus that's held within. Though I thought that was an interesting choice. If I remember correctly from reading some of the other books, if you toss papyrus in water, it will do the same thing. But don't take my word for that. Look it up yourself. I haven't done that myself. Um, but yeah, this was definitely very interesting from a historical standpoint as well, because it also follows the story of Jesus and Mary, and it really opens up your mind to the possibilities of how things actually were. Like, most people know the face value of what the Bible says, but this kind of takes a different turn, if you will, a different perspective. And there's a lot of symbols related in artwork of the Last Supper, the Mona Lisa, etc., as you can see in the cover here. She's related to all this as well. But by the end of it, once you finally realize, once all of the information is revealed, it really, it's such a satisfying book to read. You feel so satisfied by the time you finish the book, like you almost want to read through it again. But yeah, this one comes highly recommended by me and many other people. So that leaves me to hop into the third book here, called Inferno. And this one was the most recent film adaptation. And yet again, we've got another mystery to solve with a whole puzzly path to follow. But the entirety of this book centers around another book that was written many, many years ago, Dante's Inferno, if you've read that one before. And Dante's Inferno basically tells the story of a character named Dante who is traveling through the nine circles of hell with a guardian companion guide named Virgil. And you learn that each circle of hell represents a different sin that the author Dante considered, punishable, if you will. And naturally, each circle is also associated with a specific punishment related to that sin. And obviously, as you descend deeper to the next level of circles, the punishments get more and more grotesque and severe, all the way up until you encounter Satan himself in the ninth circle, which is frozen over. And you learn in Dante's Inferno that it's frozen over because of Satan. He's trapped pretty much from the waist down in ice. But the more he struggles to try and free himself, he's flapping his wings. He is literally freezing the place over. So he is literally the mechanism of his own demise and uh, imprisonment, if you will. But Robert Langdon's in a bit of a tough spot in this book. He awakes suddenly in this situation, and he's not able to remember anything, and he has injuries that he doesn't remember where he got them from, and it's hard to figure out who you can trust. And he's got another female companion different from the other two books that's following along in this adventure with him, and I can't remember her name specifically, but you learn that this guy has invented a virus that he plans to release at some point. He's basically put it inside this bag and submerged it in water, and the bag has a designated amount of time in which it will dissolve and eventually spread throughout the water system that it's located in, which will then in turn spread to people and spread to the world, and a lot of people are going to die and all that. So they're traveling through this adventure, and this one definitely makes it difficult in terms of you don't know who to trust. There's so many twists and turns, and the way things are voiced in the perspective of the book, like it's a really crazy ride in all honesty. But definitely a fascinating and historical oriented book to read, again with more puzzle solving if you like that type of thing. And by the end of the book, there's a massive twist about the virus itself, and you realize it may not be exactly what we thought it was going to be. And it's really just a fascinating conversation that they have about it. But yeah, I won't spoil that for you. I'm just going to hop into the next book. So, this is the last book that I'm aware of at the moment that features Robert Langdon as a character. And if I am recalling correctly, this one was not adapted into a film. It was adapted into a show of some sort, but Tom Hanks is not portraying Robert Langdon in this show. And I've yet to watch this show. I plan on doing so at some point because I found the book itself quite fascinating. And this one's called The Lost Symbol. And this one kind of jumps back and forth between different characters, telling the story from different viewpoints as the chronological order is going along here. But this one heavily centers around the secret society of the Freemasons, and you get to learn quite a bit about them, obviously, without learning all the details of their organization, of course. But you learn about the various and different degrees that are within their organization, which there's a total of 33 that you can ascend through, by the way. And basically, Robert Langdon is traveling with yet another female companion whose name I cannot remember. That they're traveling through DC pretty much. And obviously, if anyone knows much about DC, there's a lot of Masonic influenced architecture and designs in DC with the buildings and just the layout of the capital itself. But there's all kinds of interesting items that they collect along the way that are kind of reminiscent of the cryptex, if you will, just a whole, like, very different though, obviously. And it was fun watching the characters puzzle through all the mysteries of these items that they're having to lug along with them. And at the same time, you are just learning more about the history of DC and America itself. And by the end of it, I thought it had a pretty satisfying ending and a massive twist at the end with the bad guy that's chasing him around the whole time. And you just learn about all kinds of concepts and ideas that I'm not 100% sure if all of them exist in our world, but they're fascinating nonetheless. But that's about all that I have to say on that one. I highly recommend Dan Brown's books. Like, he obviously puts a lot of work and thought and research into his. And like, it's really, so many of them will leave you satisfied by the end of reading it. But I definitely, if you don't read the rest of these, at least read the DaVinci Code, because this one is my absolute favorite out of all of them. So well written, so well detailed, so satisfying by the end of it. So yeah, highly recommend that one. So that does it for today. That's all the books that I have. Everybody really needs to check these out. Highly recommend. And hope everyone has a great day.